Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this important panel discussion on how 350.org is creating a global movement of climate solutions. As donors, and we greatly appreciate you, today you'll get an inside glimpse on how our leadership and the grassroots are committed to achieving an equitable transition to 100% renewable energy. Your insights are very important to us, so we will leave time at the end of the panel to hear your questions and thoughts. I'm honored to be able to facilitate the session today. I have been on the board of 350.org. Oh, I'm Terry Odendahl. I've been on the board of 350.org for 3 years since I retired as president of the Global Green Grants Fund. But enough about me. Let's introduce the panelists, and I'll be asking them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. First of all, our very own, everyone is our very own here on this panel, as it turns out, but May Bouvier, the director and founder of 350.org and 350 Action. Candace Fortin, who is a US campaign manager and will have some exciting news for us about Power Up actions that just took place. Chimbeze Ezekiel, whom I'm proud to be a member of the board with. He's the co-founder of a local 350.org group in Ghana called Ghana Reducing Our Carbon. He's also a Goldman Environmental Prize Award recipient. All right, but let's get to know each other just a little bit better on the panel. Let me start with May and ask you to tell a bit more about yourself to our group of donors here.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're here and so grateful for your support. I'm May Bouvier. I'm our executive director and helped start the organization when I was fresh out of college in the mid-2000s. And I live now in the San Francisco Bay Area with my family, including my daughter. And yeah, and I'm very excited to share a little bit more with you about how our work has been evolving. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. Chimbeze, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'll gladly do so, Terry. So I am Chimbeze Ezekiel. I am based in Accra, Ghana. I got involved with 350.org way back in 2013 during the Global Power Shift Conference, and that was what triggered my climate activism over the period. So I'm a climate activist. I also advocate for renewable energy as better alternatives as compared to fossil fuel. Yes, so I'm a youth activist and I work largely with young people as not the future leaders, but the current leaders. So that's basically what I do. And I'm thankful for the time also to also share my experience with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Candace, who's meeting with us from an airport. So we're going to put up with any noise we hear. And also, as you might guess, she's catching a plane, so she'll need to leave just a little bit early. We'll miss her. But Candace, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Candace, she, her pronouns. I am based in upstate New York. I'm originally from Pensacola, Florida on the Gulf Coast, and my first fight was actually against offshore drilling by BP. I was doing water testing in a biology class and was questioning what some of the chemicals that were coming into the water. So I did a press conference outside my high school on a Saturday that no one attended, but it was the only opposition piece that was against offshore drilling at the time. And of course, we know what happened afterwards, the BP oil spill. Fast forward, I've worked on over 30 elections and done a lot of issue-based work in the intersections of criminal justice, environmental justice, solar campaigns, and immigration rights as well. And I started at 350 in April as the U.S. campaigns manager, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And this is just a slight idea of the terrific people that we have working as both on staff and as volunteers for 350.org. I'm going to start with a few questions, and I'm going to ask Candace to answer first. Why is it vital to bring young people to the table to fight climate change?
I would say some of it feels probably obvious and some of it doesn't. I think that we're at a really critical time right now where we don't know, honestly, what our next generation is going to experience, what they're going to have to face. I feel like a lot of kids and Gen Z and younger are having to really bear the brunt of a lot of the actions and inactions that our previous generations have put upon them to fight climate change and, really going against fossil fuel industries. So I think it really is important that we get them mobilized in a way that makes sense, that doesn't burn them out, that meets them where they are. I think it's important that we create spaces that feel safe and exploratory and, don't have a lot of intellectual barriers where folks can really tap in. But I think, the youth really is the future. And we've seen this in other cross-pollinations of movements, whether it's with Iran or, other movements throughout the world where the youth is really stepping up. And I feel like they have the power to really move the message, create the message, and, mobilize in ways that we haven't seen before.
Great, thanks. May.
I certainly feel this deeply because 350 came out of youth organizing. When we were starting 350, there were other youth-led climate coalitions popping up in Australia, China, India, Canada, and we all really joined forces together to help birth what is now this global organization that we all work together as part of. So it's very much our roots, but it's only become more important as time has gone on. And, back in 2019, the biggest surge of activism ever on climate was led by young people. And, we worked with young people to bring over 7 million people worldwide out onto the streets, which is the largest climate demonstration that's ever happened. And that would not have happened without the leadership of young people, their vision, their courage, and the ways in which we can partner together to make change happen. And that, I think, lifted the spirits of everyone in the climate movement, and as Candace was saying, they brought new ideas that none of us had thought before. Who would have thought about a school strike for climate action, right? But now that's something that students associate with climate change action. So there's innovation, there's inspiration, there's leadership. I just had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to be part of a panel of young leaders from around the world. And one of the speakers got involved in youth activism after a school shooting in Florida at her school and helped start March for Our Lives, which is the big US youth gun violence prevention organization. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Greta Thunberg actually credits her own activism by watching what March for Our Lives did. And so youth also learn from each other and they watch how each other organize, and that has ripples that spread around the entire world.
Well, let's move on to Chibeze, and I know you'll have something to say about Ghana with regard to youth, why youth are vital.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity once again. I think that for young people, we cannot do without them. In any case, when we talk about the global ambition, the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, we keep hearing about the year 2050, 2070, which means that those who are making decisions today may not live to see the year 2070. So what it means that whatever decision we are making today will have direct impact on the youth of today. Therefore, it is very critical to involve the young people today to participate in the choices we are making today, so they can also be well prepared to safeguard the environment in the future. But for us in Ghana, also, if I could just share one specific example, we are seeing young people that they can feel the impact of climate change. It's no more abstract. As I speak, we are in November and it's still raining. It should have stopped raining since July, but it's still raining in Ghana. And it's very clear that the climate change is happening. Therefore, the youth have taken up that responsibility because it's affecting their career, it's affecting our education, it's even affecting our source of livelihood. So it's a case, let me call it, it's an emergency case for us as young people in Ghana. And if I can conclude, I must say that the energy that young people possess can be likened to a mighty rushing water, which means that if we don't direct them, they will end up becoming destructive. Whether we like it or not, youth are very energetic. they have the time, they have the energy, they want to do something. So if you don't direct them properly, they will end up doing something that may be very sad or that may disrupt the environment. So for us, we want to channel the force of young people towards the fight against climate change because it has direct impact, direct benefit for them in their own small ways. For us, that's why we think it's important to involve the youth because their future also is dependent on the climate crisis. Thank you very much.
And of course, youth will inherit all our mistakes as well as our victories. Moving on to another question, especially while we do have Candace here. What do you think is one hard truth about organizing young people that you want to share with the donors?
I would say, I'm not sure if it's a hard truth, but it's definitely something that I think I've learned mobilizing the youth, I'd say in the past like 4 to 5 years and having a concerted effort around that. To really give them the wheel as far as, making some decisions about things, because there's things that sometimes like culturally, like, and I'll share more about this with the New Orleans action, but, there's people that I might remember from my youth that ring that bell, but to them, they're like, I have no idea who that is. And, you have to kind of give them that kind of leverage to say like, no, we know who the artists are. We know who people are going to come out here for. We know what the social media needs to look like, and really kind of giving them the tools and the education and the support to kind of drive that. I think sometimes we can have this dichotomy of like the kind of elders of the movement setting the stage for the youth, but sometimes we don't give the youth the same kind of platform and positioning that they also need and deserve to kind of drive things forward and mobilize their own folks. So I think that's something that I've learned. I wouldn't say it was a hard truth, but definitely something that I needed to kind of register and digest as like a fundamental piece of youth organizing. It's like giving them the platform, giving them the space, giving them the education, and letting them really steer the work from there in ways that make sense to them.
Thank you. May, what would you say?
It's
What's the
similar
hard
to,
truth?
yeah, similar to Candace, but I think it's a fine line between empowerment and well, how empowerment happens. Like when we were starting 350, we did not have movement mentors who were giving us feedback about things we weren't doing right. It wouldn't have been good. And I think but how that feedback is shared and how your agency as a young activist is still supported can be hard to do that really well. But I've had debates with colleagues in the movement that, young people don't need our help. Let them lead, let them do this their own way. That's not my point of view. My point of view is it has to be an intergenerational partnership, an intergenerational movement, and we all have something to teach each other. And it's part of young people's role in movements to push, and push really hard. But they're pushing back against something, right? And that something has to be strong and clear. Otherwise, they can't push against it. So we owe it to young people to provide some overarching vision and guidance about the work that they're trying to impact. And that's, I don't think that's patronizing in any way. I think that's necessary to help young people develop the skills they need to stay involved, because burnout is real for young activists. It really is. And as Chibeze was saying, helping people stay involved on this issue long-term requires building new skills and having partners in the work who want to help you learn things. So, we try to we have a youth fellowship where we work with I think 12 different young people from around the world. And that's the point, is like, who are some of the people in our network that we really see who want to learn, who we can work with and invest in, so that they can get to the next place of impact that they want to have.
Thank you. Because I'm keenly aware of the time, I want to skip over you for just a moment, Chibeze, and go back to Candace. You just organized a massively attended event in the Gulf that brought together a coalition of grassroots groups. Can you talk about the coalitions and how you reach and organize specifically young people outside the traditional movement? I know you've talked just a bit about that already.
Sure. So to start, this really definitely was introduced within a coalition that already existed of frontline fighters who are really tackling specifically LNG. LNG, liquid natural gas, emits about 80% more methane than traditional fossil fuels. And in a place like the Gulf, where they have so many critical issues that are happening with saltwater intrusion, multiple plants exploding, salt caverns collapsing and putting lead into the pipes. There's just a whole hotbed of issues that are happening. And the last thing that they need is more methane going into the atmosphere and putting people in a critical space. So I presented this idea to a group that, all lived on the front lines, all have to inhale these chemicals, these smokes on a day-to-day basis. And I was actually surprised by some of their feedback, which was essentially, we need to do this. This is like Joy as an act of resistance, is a space where we can create a lot of fun, a lot of engagement, and bring new people into the work. So we really kind of approached the event with that kind of framework as a way to bring new people into this space, sort of like a climate justice 101. So we first of all went through some headliners, like some local bounce artists, folks that we felt would be really, really fun to bring people in. We set up a space called a Kid Zone, which had like a bouncy house and like cotton candy and like a gaming zone and like face painting and things like that. We had a lot of the younger coalition groups table at the event just to kind of bring new people into the space. And we also did some unorthodox recruitment. So aside from just the normal things that nonprofits do as far as, like putting out their emails and sending out the texts, we also had a street team of that was run by pretty much like an all-Black group that went to HBCU games, football games, basketball games that were happening around the same time. And we're literally flyering out there, talking to people one-on-one, going to homecoming games, just like really trying to do that on the ground recruitment, because they knew in New Orleans, like word of mouth is kind of what it is. And that's the thing that's going to get people out. And also just like flying around during the event itself, making sure that kids came in. And like there was a certain point where kids were like jumping over the fence to come to the event because they just wanted to check out the artists. But we really tried to use people who were on the ground, who were local, who had a really good, keen sense about who to target and where to go, from nightclubs to HBCU games to football games to basketball games. And it led to us having 500 folks at the event. So it felt really, really great. And, we have like quite a few signups now of people who want to continue to learn more, who want to be involved, who want to see what the next steps are. And I think just being a little bit out of the box and listening to what folks told me, I think was what was effective for that event.
Very impressive. Thank you so much. I think we might see some clips of that at the end. Chibeze, you won the 2020 Goldman Environmental Prize for your activism in stopping the coal industry from entering Ghana by having the Ghanaian government cancel the construction. And I'm not going to go into it here, but a 700 megawatt coal power plant. Can you tell us how you did that? And how do you think your and your team's youth activities were underestimated?
Well, it was a huge task ahead for us to jump over. But I think that what was quite useful for us was the approach we adopted. Because looking at where we are or where we're coming from, never in our life or never in Ghana have we seen young people being able to challenge government and be able to succeed, in that approach. Over the period, there has been around demonstrations, walking on the streets, which actually doesn't even result, in the change that we do expect. So when this coal issue came up, we have to consciously take time to strategize what would be the best approach. There are a number of approaches we adopted, but I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just focus on two. One has to do with the submarine approach we adopted. I realized that most of the time when NGOs, or in Africa particularly, are responding to government policy, we tend to be reactive. We tend to be a knee-jerk response to what government intends to do. We don't take them to analyze their policy and punch the potholes or the loopholes in their policy. It's the basis to advance our advocacy. So when the announcement came out, we went into the community because government indicated that yes, they've done consultation, they've spoken to the youth, they've spoken to the women, the chiefs are all bought into the coal plant. But we have to verify that kind of, and that kind of, it's coming from government. So we spent time in the community about 3 or 4 days asking questions, doing surveys, taking photos, taking videos, just to get information for our advocacy work and to double check whether what government is saying was the true reflection. And so we did all this on a quiet. There was no social media campaign. We didn't grant any interview. So our idea was to gather enough data and information. And again, Ghana doesn't have coal deposits. So therefore, we have to rely on our partners in South Africa, in Kenya to share their experience with us because South Africa has coal deposits. So we have to learn from all these partners to get enough information. So when we came out publicly, we were not speaking based on feelings, based on emotions or what we think, but we're speaking based on facts, based on evidence to articulate our points. And the second aspect or the second approach we adopted was providing solutions. Because more often than not, NGOs are very quick to oppose government without providing alternatives. And so what we do is that we are saying no to coal, but yes to renewable. And we provided enough justification, enough reasons why we think renewable energy is far better than coal plant. And let me just quickly say that, for example, government said they are building a coal plant, one, to create employment among young people. I will argue that if it's about employment, renewable energy promises more jobs than coal plant. So therefore, if it's about jobs, then let's go for renewable energy. So we made those arguments and we're showing young people who were also providing solutions as an evidence that indeed the youth themselves can also become the answers for our energy solution. So that was how we approached this campaign. And I think that because of the solutions or the critique we're providing, that gave enough credence to our campaign, and therefore government had to back down, on the plan to build a coal plant. And today in Ghana, we are promoting clean energy, even though not to our expectation, but it is far better today than 4 or 5 years ago. So basically, those were the two main approaches we adopted, towards the fight against the coal plant in Ghana. Thank you.
Really exciting. And I hope you don't mind if I ask this. Do you think that in a way you and your group were underestimated because of your age? I mean, it was such a huge thing that you accomplished.
Yes, and yes, they were underestimated, and that is why we took time, to do our homework very well, because we've seen in other situations where youth speak and government never listens to them. So we have to take our time, do our homework, get our data, get our research findings. So when we are speaking like intellectuals, not just based on feelings or emotions. So that estimation was there, our underestimation was there, but we have to prove government wrong, that we know what we are saying and that we are offering better alternatives. So yes, it was there, but we have to, disprove government on that.
Right. Obviously, you had the expertise to present. I want May to also talk to us a little bit because 350.org is known for keeping fossil fuels in the ground and stopping fossil fuel finance, recruiting, training, and supporting activists, among a few things. Why now is 350.org sort of changing its strategy? And what can you tell us about that?
Well, I think Chibeze's example is such a good reason about why we are and why we have, because we started to observe over the last few years that we were starting to win against fossil fuels when we had an alternative and not when we didn't. And the demand really came up from our partners and our volunteer groups and groups like Chibeze's, who had all these examples of saying, yes, we don't want these fossil fuel projects in our communities, but we can't just say no. We have to offer something instead. And so that seed was planted over many years. And then there were a few things happened externally that also convinced us that this was the right thing to do. It's clear that the energy transition isn't happening fast enough. If you look at the data, we have to build 1.5 terawatts of new renewable energy every year starting in 2030 to stay below 1.5. So you can remember 1.5 for 1.5, but we're nowhere near that level of building that has to happen. And in talking to colleagues and allies who actually work in the clean energy industry, they've been really clear that they actually can't do this without movements, that we actually need to be advocating for solutions, that it's not, the transition is not going to happen automatically. And so from that perspective, and we've always very much been driven by the urgency of the crisis, that also spoke to us very, very strongly. You know, as you're all aware, we've really intentionally been trying to think about where can we make the biggest difference in the climate fight. And so we've been paying attention to the fact that the fossil fuel industry is moving its center of gravity to the global south. They're building more and more coal plants and projects, just like what Chibeze was experiencing in Ghana. And the climate movement as a whole is underinvested in those same places. We're not nearly as strong in Africa, Asia, Latin America as the climate movement is in the US and Europe. So we've very deliberately as an organization sought to try to do something about that. And it was in that context that it was very clear in some of these places, there is no access to electricity, period. And without an alternative, stopping a project that could turn the lights on in your community is very, very difficult thing to ask people. We didn't want to be in a position of continuing to do that. And then, you know, on the positive side, a lot of our partners are doing really, really valuable work stopping fossil fuel projects, using campaigns that we've all worked on together, whether that's using finance as a tool, whether that's protests at pipelines, but this is really embedded in our movement, which is brilliant. It gives space for a group like ours to try something new and to contribute something new. And I'm not suggesting that like renewable energy is new. It's been around for quite some time, but for activist movement organizations to work on it, that is new. And we want to contribute that. So that was a lot of what we thought about. And I'll just end by echoing something that Candace said, and then that Chibeze said. We also have a hope, I guess, that by focusing on solutions, it will bring some joy into this work. We're all very worried about the climate crisis, obviously, or we wouldn't be here. But just that is not enough to fuel us, and it's certainly not enough to build the movement. So we have a hope that by focusing on the world we want to build, more people will want to join us and will be fulfilled and will have fun and be part of a community they want to be part of if we're in this solutions side of the equation. And that maybe, just maybe, we can make the movement bigger and stronger, which it desperately needs to be. Not only with young people, but with lots of other groups that we have not yet been working with inside of the climate movement. So, you know, early signs are really positive. Candace's action was one of hundreds around the world last weekend, part of this Power Up Day of Action, which is meant to showcase where are the places around the world where we're starting to see this shift towards solutions, and how are we as 350 cohering that into a global story of hope that puts pressure on political leaders as well. So that was really encouraging to see what's already happening on the ground. And we're going to continue that this whole month in the lead up to the COP in the UAE.
Thank you. Yes, we need hope since October was the hottest day on record for, I believe, 125 years around the world. I'm very aware of Candace's schedule, so I want to pose my last question and also ask those of you who are participating in other ways to start thinking about and possibly even writing your questions into the question and answer box. Here's my last question. I'm going to ask everybody to answer it. And Candace, if there are any additional thoughts you'd like to add, please do. What's the one thing you want the donors on this call to know about the people fighting on the ground against the fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, sorry for the overhead, but
please check with your airline.
I'm not even sure where to start with that. It's
Tell us more than one thing. That's fine.
right. I would say anecdotally, and just, you know, having worked with folks, going through Cancer Alley tours, spending some time in Southwest Louisiana, but then also holding virtual space with folks where we have, an 80-year-old elder who has to take off her gas mask inside of her home. This is in Sulphur, Louisiana, because there was a chemical plant explosion and she can't breathe inside her home. We have folks who have to take pauses because there's a lead warning within their water systems and they have to go deal with that. There's people who are breathing in pollution that, made me sick within an hour. And I can't imagine what it's like to live like that on a day-to-day basis, where there's, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, sirens that go off at noon every Monday because it's a test in case there's another chemical explosion. And I just want folks to know that people on the front lines, it's more than a buzzword. It's something that is actually pretty unimaginable. To hear some of these things that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, sometimes from birth. Some people have had these experiences where they've grown up with, teenagers in their communities had hysterectomies because of the amount of chemicals that are going out into the atmosphere. I know someone who has several children. One has a seizure disorder, one has emphysema, one has eczema, and all of it's being attributed to what's happening at the chemical plant. And those are children that she has to take care of. And I just want folks to know that the people who are fighting this, they're really doing it tooth and nail. It's not a game, it's life or death. And the ways that we can show up is really as a resource, as logistical support, because they are full. They're really fighting for their lives right now. And it's not a metaphor. It's not, it's not hyperbole. It really is the truth. And, the ways that I think, bigger organizations who may not be on the front lines can really support is providing these resources. If they want to have an event for joy, providing that for them, figuring it out, making sure that we get funding to make it successful. And I feel like that is a extremely strong and important role that needs to happen more often.
Great. Thank you so much. And in case we don't get to talk to you again, we so appreciate your work. Chibeze, what are one or two things you want the people listening to know about the fighting on the ground?
Well, one key observation or experience I would say is that I try to put myself in the shoes of the ordinary young Ghanaian or young person. Why should a young person care about the environment? Why should they even bother? I have realized that young people are often moved by incentives or some form of motivation. And this, and that is something that is actually growing our movement in Ghana and the success we are earning at the moment, in the sense that we are creating business opportunities out of this struggle, that the youth are not just speaking, but they are providing the solutions. So we have young people who are now into green businesses, as a way to tackle air pollution. They are producing briquettes as against the use of wood fuel, trying to shift attention from the use of LPG gas, which is fossil fuel, to the use of briquettes, which are made from organic waste. And this has been done by young people, getting employment, earning income. So they are advocating, but they're also getting incentives or being motivated by what they're doing. So I believe that if young people are supported in this way, they can create businesses along the value chain, create employment, at the same time also creating environmental sustainability. So for me, it is one key lesson I've learned, and I believe that if the listeners or supporters can support some of these solutions, it will go a long way to be able to, like we say in Ghana, to use one stone to kill two birds, protect the environment, and create green jobs being led by young people themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. May, what do you want us to know here today?
I think just underscoring that, we're part of a network of millions of people who are working on fighting the climate crisis every day, and are incredibly dedicated. And I think, when you support 350, you're supporting this interconnected web of people. And that's really why we exist, is to try to keep the movement connected, keep the movement strong, and keep it growing. Because there are tons and tons of people who wake up every day building a solar project in their community, creating the policy mechanisms necessary to stop an LNG terminal, you know, we are anything but alone in this fight. And I think that's what I would encourage people to remember, and to know that, you know, you're hearing from a few of us on this call, but we're connected to hundreds of inspiring people, thousands, and we're just one organization, right? So I think just being always mindful of how powerful our movement is, how dedicated people are, and how much your support enables that to happen.
Thank you. And now we are going to open it up to your questions and thoughts. It's my pleasure to introduce Christina Roberts, who is 350.org's director of, she doesn't like her title that much, but mid-level and major gifts. And she's going to help me facilitate the questions. And she did organize this whole program. So I want to give her credit and thanks for that and all her other hard work in the organization. So Christina, take it away.
Thank you. And I love my title, but it's a little long. Yeah, thank you for everyone for joining. We're gonna open it up to questions and Terry and I will facilitate it. So there's two ways to ask a question. You can either put it in the Q&A section and we'll read it out loud. You have the option to submit your question anonymously, or if you want, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can just say your question out loud. So I think we already
have a couple. We have a couple. Why don't I read what I think was the first one to come in from an attendee. Many wise words on organizing, and I support the strategy for building the new while fighting fossil fuels. In Africa, how are the lessons from Ghana being shared across the continent where many other projects are in process? And so I think this is for you, Chibeze, although I'm sure May could answer it as well. Any work with the investors, including nations using so-called development funds for fossil fuel projects? Shall we start with that, Christina?
Yes, that sounds
Okay.
great.
Go ahead, Chibeze.
Thanks, Terry. Yes, so what we do is we take advantage of every platform to share our experiences, particularly with other young people, so they can trigger similar interventions in their country. I remember during the Lamu campaign in Kenya, we worked with our police in Kenya to be able to also fight off, the plan to build a coal plant in Lamu in Kenya, and which they succeeded. We're also working closely with our colleagues, with the EACOP, gas pipeline that even our government wants to construct. So we always share those ideas with our friends in the African countries. And I'm happy to announce that 350 Africa has platform like Africa VUCA, dedicated for sharing lessons, experiences, and knowledge amongst ourselves. So that's a space we also use to amplify our experience to other colleagues can also learn. And we also use the advantage to learn what others are doing to also strengthen our campaign in Ghana. So 350 Africa has a platform which is has been very useful for knowledge sharing and learning. The last bit of the question was about investors, any work with investors, including nations using so-called funds for fossil fuel projects. One of the things we do in Ghana is that we also track the financing of development partners, particularly the MDBs or DFIs as we call them, the World Banks, the EFDBs, because they play a critical role. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we are even organizing a capacity building workshop for CSOs on the World Bank's RISE mechanism. That's a regulatory indicators for sustainable energy. These are database that the World Bank, brings out annually among different countries. How do we use those data, to track our progress when it comes to energy efficiency? But these are some capacity building we do, and able to track the bank. Where are they investing their money into? So that's how we do in our own small CSOs to track the financing of these banks, also the investors where they're putting their money. So basically, That's what we are doing in our own small way, trying to engage the bank that it is more important to put in investment or funding into energy efficient or clean energy as compared to fossil fuel, for the reasons that we are fighting climate change. So that's what we are doing in our own small way. All right. Thank you very much.
Very astute. Thank you. I want to encourage people to raise their hands. We are getting some written questions as well, but we can do it either way. Question from Mark DuPont. A recent New York Times article states that if current projections hold, by 2030, the three largest fossil fuel producers, US, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, will be drilling more fossil fuels than at any point in history, not reducing production. May, I'm going to ask you, how do we address this, especially given that Saudi Arabia and Russia are not responsive to popular and international opinion?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question and something that we think about all the time. And I think our overall assessment on where we are in the battle against fossil fuels is that the fossil fuel industry and the countries that operate as if they were the fossil fuel industry are making a huge surge. And I think a few years ago, the movement was making a lot of progress in this regard and like really harming the view of the fossil fuel industry. And we were seeing the numbers to back that up in terms of emissions and planned production. And the industry has completely rebounded. Part of what that has shown us is that the movement like everyone in the movement has to think really hard about how to change our odds. And that's part of why we made a shift in strategy, is we felt that if we just kept doing the same thing more and better, it wasn't necessarily going to change the underlying politics of the issue. And in countries where, for example, Saudi Arabia and Russia really depend on buying their product, there has to be a demand that's in opposition, and there has to be a demand for an alternative. And actually, the war in Ukraine was a major reason for us to make this shift in strategy, because what we saw there was it's very much an energy fueled conflict. And a lot of European countries, when faced with the prospect of losing access to Russian gas, were not able to pivot quickly enough to renewable energy. And part of our assessment was that the movements in Europe were not in a position to make that ask fiercely enough, fast enough. So just to say it, in that particular example, we have to think differently about how we're confronting the challenge. And we don't think that the movement is making a sufficient impact just doing what we were doing before. So that's sort of my big answer to your question. It's too soon to tell how this will play out, but we all take it extremely seriously. And I'll just jump to your other question while I'm off mute, which is about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and permitting reform. And the sort of quick answer to this important question is we have about 150 volunteer 350 groups around the US who have been active. Many of you are probably contributing to them in some way, shape, or form. Many of them have been active in either advocacy for clean energy in their community or advocacy against fossil fuels. And so they're very, very well experienced in exactly the kind of fights that are going to happen over permitting reform. And so we've been talking to all of them about how we might support them better to engage in that work, because they have already built coalitions with frontline partners and youth groups and everything we've been talking about on this call. But we actually really need your help here, because there's a lot of work that they want to get started doing, and they need help. So this is a place where all of you could make a real difference.
All right, I am going to do one of the questions. What objectives does 350 have for COP28?
I can take this one. This is going to be a difficult COP. just like last year, in terms of getting a really ambitious and fair outcome, the one that we all need. What we're really paying attention to is two things. One is the potential for a major announcement on investment in renewable energy, which really could come out of this particular COP. The problem with that is if it's done on its own, it's going to be used as a bit of a greenwash by the UAE government to avoid having to do anything to stop fossil fuel production. So this is really putting our new strategy to the test. So what we've decided to do is we need to pair the demand for a phase out of fossil fuels with a demand for investment in clean energy. They shouldn't be seen as separate things. They should be seen as the same thing. So we've been working with partners on that, and there's a lot of alignment to try to make that happen, but it's going to be very difficult. So that's what we're really focused on. We're sending a fairly small team this time around, partly because we don't think that this COP is going to be fantastic. And we're really starting to focus our attention on 2 COPs from now in Brazil, where we actually think there could be something quite ambitious that comes out of it if we all work together really hard in the lead up to that. So we're already starting to orient our sights in that direction. And our team is really motivated because we've been doing a lot of work in Brazil over many years, and we think that we might have a good chance of success, and we really need it.
Thanks. Chibeze, as the leader of a local group in Ghana and on the board of 350.org, our leadership, what do you think, and I think this may be the last question, how would you address the effectiveness of the COPs as compared to local organizing?
To a large extent, thank you for the question, Terry. To a large extent, there's been some kind of disconnect between the global conversation and what happens at the local level. And that is something we're trying to address or bridge that gap. And because once there are decisions taken up at the global level, how do we ensure that we are tracking the implementation, at least if not at all, at the national level in Ghana? So one other thing that we are doing is for the past couple of years, for 3 years consistently, we've been running what we call the pre-COP, National Pre-COP Youth Summit, where basically we bring together the Ghanaian climate negotiators to engage with young people who want to educate the youth about the COP discussions on negotiations, what Ghana is going to negotiate on, what we should expect, so the youth can understand and make contributions and comments on what they think government should also take into consideration. But what we have failed to do to a large extent is to also hold a post-COP session. That after the COP negotiations, after the final outcome documents, what does it mean for us? How do we take it forward? And hopefully next year we intend to do the post-COP session, where we're going to now unpack the outcome documents. What does it mean? What is the implication for us as a country? How can our NDCs or our NAP processes contribute to that conversation or the outcome document? Then we can now tackle that from ensure that we are actually making input into the global conversation. Otherwise, people have said that the COP has become more like a talk shop. They go and talk, make pledges over the years, and still nothing happens. We are still calling for the $100 billion, which never seems to occur. But how can we, at least the little we have, demonstrate that at least as much as possible to ensure that the poor and vulnerable are not continually affected by the increased impact of climate change. So that is what we want to do from next year, to hold a post-COP session. What does it mean? Let's look at the issues. How do we ensure that these conversations don't end at the global level, but we are seeing practical solutions to redeem the poor and the vulnerable from the harsh conditions of climate change. So that is what we are trying to do in our own small way. And we're hoping to also get our colleagues from the African continents so we can put this agenda and put pressure on our government to deliver on their own commitments at the COP negotiations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's an excellent conclusion to the questions from you. I don't see any more questions, although we might have time for one if you want to raise your hand. All right, we do have another clip that Christina, oh, we got another question. COP28 will have a greater focus on food and farming. That's right. Thank you for that. Many organizations and nations are collaborating on declarations on agriculture, and efforts are on for support for agroecology and organic, free from fossil-based fertilizers, less intensive animal production, and so on. Is this with 350's work area to support it? May, I'll ask you to take that.
Sure. I mean, the short answer is not really, mostly because we just can't do everything. And the fossil fuel energy transition work keeps us pretty busy. But I have observed really positive developments over the course of the last few COPs of how much food and farming and agroecology have become a major topic. So I think for people who are interested in that, you can feel really proud of the work that's happening to elevate that issue, because it's getting a lot more attention. And we try to stay in partnership with those groups and help them whenever they ask us. But we've tended to not get too involved there, just because our read is there's a lot of groups that are doing great work. Yeah, so that's what I would say. And I guess the one caveat to that is that some of our regions do more work in this area than others. So it's not to say that we don't ever work on it. It's just not been a focus. So I would say some of the groups on the African continent that organize as part of Africa VUCA, some of the groups in the Pacific Islands actually do work on land use issues because it's so important for their local supporters. So we're not doing like a global campaign per se, but we are not inactive at the local level. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's take a look at this video. Oh, let's see. Is there something? Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Christina. I think
Yeah, I'm gonna end on a video, and then we're gonna end the webinar. And this is just a great wrap-up video from our Power Up events.
And I want to thank all of you for coming out today. And we will follow up the recording of this with a recording of this call, so you can continue to support the movement in a number of ways. And I would be remiss as chair of the fundraising committee of the board if I didn't ask you to make your year-end contribution if you haven't already. Make another contribution if you're in a position to do it. The work is important. Now is the time to give. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
I'm powering up today to be part of a community building a brighter future, one that's not based on extraction but based on justice.
Being out here fighting for the purpose of no more fossil fuel.
Transición energética justa.
Today, we power up. Sasol must power up.
Power up renewable energy. Power up climate solution. Power up electricity that is free, very friendly with the environment, with the people, and it's sustainable. That is why we are here today.